The crisp autumn breeze swept through the bustling streets of New York City, carrying with it the sweet scent of pumpkin spice from nearby cafes and the gentle rustle of golden leaves dancing across the sidewalk. It was just another Tuesday afternoon on Fifth Avenue, where the endless stream of yellow taxis created a familiar symphony of city life. Barron Trump, now 17 and remarkably tall at 6'7", walked with easy grace despite his height. He'd grown into a poised young man, his neat brown hair and thoughtful expression making him look older than his years. Though he came from one of the most famous families in America, there was something refreshingly down-to-earth about him as he strolled past the luxury boutiques and towering skyscrapers he'd known all his life. The autumn sun caught the windows of Trump Tower, sending sparkles of light across the street as Barron adjusted his simple blue sweater. His security detail kept a respectful distance, trying to give him as much normalcy as possible while still ensuring his safety. They'd become used to his preference for blending in rather than standing out, despite his height making that somewhat challenging. Around him, the sidewalk buzzed with the energy that only New York could create. Business people rushed past with coffee cups clutched in their hands. Tourists stopped to take photos of the famous buildings, and street vendors called out their deals on hot dogs and pretzels. The smell of roasted nuts from a nearby cart mixed with the crispness of the autumn air, creating that unique New York atmosphere that felt like home. Barron couldn't help but notice how many people were lost in their phones, barely looking up as they navigated the crowded sidewalk. He'd always found it fascinating how, in a city of millions, people could feel so alone together. Maybe that's why he preferred these walks, where he could observe life happening around him instead of getting lost in a screen. A group of schoolchildren passed by, their backpacks bouncing as they laughed and chatted. An old man walked his tiny dog, which wore a sweater that matched its owner's scarf. A street musician played the saxophone, its sweet melody floating above the traffic noise. These were the moments Barron enjoyed most, being part of the city's daily life, just another face in the crowd. As he approached the corner of 56th Street, the wind picked up slightly, sending a few leaves swirling around his feet. The afternoon sun cast long shadows from the buildings, creating a dramatic play of light and shade on the busy sidewalk. Despite growing up in the spotlight, Barron had managed to maintain a sense of normalcy in his life, and these regular walks were part of that. He passed the familiar shops and cafes, nodding politely to the doormen who recognized him but respectfully kept their distance. The security team had grown used to his routine, knowing he preferred to walk at his own pace rather than be rushed from place to place in a car. It was these moments of relative freedom that helped him stay grounded despite his unique circumstances. The city's energy seemed to build as the afternoon wore on, with more people filling the sidewalks as offices began to empty and the early dinner crowd emerged. The mix of languages and accents around him reminded Barron of why he loved New York. It was a place where everyone belonged, where every story mattered. Little did he know that in just a few moments, this ordinary afternoon would turn into something extraordinary. As he continued his walk, taking in the sights and sounds of his beloved city, fate was about to present an opportunity that would reveal the true character of this young man who had grown up in the public eye. The scene unfolded like a slow-motion movie. Just ahead of Barron, an elderly woman struggled with her shopping bags, the weight clearly too much for her small frame. She was probably in her 70s, wearing a neat purple coat and sensible shoes, the kind of person who'd lived in the city long enough to know its every corner. Her silver hair caught the afternoon light as she tried to adjust her grip on the multiple bags from the local grocery store. The sidewalk was especially busy at this hour, with people rushing home from work or heading to early dinner reservations. Business suits and casual wear blurred together in the typical New York crowd, everyone focused on their own destination. The woman had stopped near a street vendor's cart, trying to rearrange her bags while maintaining her balance. Nearby, a group of tourists were busy taking selfies with Trump Tower in the background, their excited chatter adding to the street noise. A delivery person on a bike whizzed past, narrowly missing the woman's shopping bags. She took a startled step backward, her heel catching on an uneven section of the sidewalk that locals knew to avoid. Time seemed to slow down as she began to lose her balance. Her shopping bags, filled with fresh fruits and what looked like a week's worth of groceries, started slipping from her grasp. A young man wearing headphones walked past, his eyes glued to his phone screen, completely unaware of the situation unfolding beside him. A businessman talking loudly on his phone simply stepped around her without breaking his conversation. The woman's arms windmilled slightly as she tried to regain her balance, but the weight of the shopping bags worked against her. Her eyes widened in fear as she realized she was about to fall. A few oranges escaped from one of her bags, rolling across the sidewalk like bright rubber balls. Someone kicked one accidentally, sending it spinning toward the curb. The crowd's reaction was typical of New York. A few gasps, some people stepping back to avoid being involved, others pretending not to notice as they hurried past. A mother pulled her child closer, quietly telling him not to stare. The hot dog vendor half-stepped forward, but was stuck behind his cart, unable to help. The woman's shopping bags finally gave way completely, spilling their contents across the sidewalk. Apples rolled in every direction, a loaf of bread skidded toward a newspaper stand, and a carton of eggs teetered precariously on the edge of the curb. The sound of glass clinking suggested there might be something breakable in one of the bags. She fell forward, her purple coat fluttering in the breeze, her hands unable to break her fall because they were still tangled in the shopping bag handles. A collective intake of breath from the nearest bystanders seemed to freeze the moment in time. Someone muttered, "Oh no," but still, nobody moved to help. Through the gaps in the crowd, Barron could see everything happening. His security detail was already moving forward, but their focus was on scanning for threats rather than helping fallen citizens. They were trained to protect, not to assist, and their earpieces crackled with routine communications. The scene perfectly captured the paradox of city life, being surrounded by hundreds of people yet feeling completely alone. The woman's face showed not just fear of falling, but also the resignation of someone who didn't expect help to come. In a city known for its tough exterior, moments like these often tested its heart. Traffic continued to rush past on the street, the shadows of the tall buildings creating a canyon of concrete and glass around the small drama unfolding on the sidewalk. A street musician's melody drifted over from the corner, an oddly appropriate soundtrack to the moment. The autumn wind picked up again, sending a few loose papers from someone's dropped newspaper dancing across the scene. It was one of those moments that revealed the true nature of a city and its people. Would someone step forward to help, or would everyone simply walk past, leaving the woman to manage on her own? The next few seconds would answer that question, though not in the way anyone expected. The crowd was about to witness something that would remind them that sometimes the most powerful acts of kindness come from the most unexpected sources. Without a moment's hesitation, Barron's long legs carried him through the crowd. His sudden movement caught his security team off guard. They were used to his calm, measured pace. The head of security reached for his earpiece, already calling for backup as his young charge broke formation. But Barron was already several steps ahead, his athletic frame moving with surprising agility through the sea of onlookers. People began to recognize him as he passed, their expressions changing from indifference to surprise. A few phones came up to record the scene, but Barron paid them no attention. His focus was entirely on reaching the fallen woman. His security detail tried to keep up, their well-rehearsed protocols suddenly challenged by this unexpected situation. The crowd parted almost instinctively as Barron moved through. His height gave him a natural advantage. At 6'7", he could see exactly where he needed to go. A businessman clutching a briefcase stepped back, coffee forgotten in his hand. A group of teenagers stopped their chatter mid-sentence, watching the scene unfold. The hot dog vendor leaned forward over his cart, a half-prepared hot dog forgotten in his hands. Barron's swift response seemed to break the spell of urban indifference. As he moved, others began to step forward too, as if his action had reminded them of their own humanity. A woman in a business suit picked up a stray orange that had rolled near her feet. An elderly man reached down to retrieve the fallen loaf of bread. The city's heart was beginning to show through its tough exterior. His security team spread out around him as he approached the fallen woman, their training kicking in despite the unusual circumstances. They created a natural barrier, not to keep people away, but to give their charge the space he needed to help. Their faces remained professional, but there was a hint of pride in their expressions as they watched the young man they protected show such immediate concern for a stranger. The autumn wind tugged at Barron's sweater as he closed the final few steps. His shadow fell across the sidewalk, providing a moment of shade for the woman who was still trying to gather herself. The late afternoon sun caught his profile, and for a moment, onlookers could see the resemblance to his father, the same determined set of the jaw, but softened by a gentleness that was entirely his own. Time seemed to speed up again as Barron reached the woman's side. His long arms could easily bridge the distance needed to help, but he moved carefully, aware that his height might seem intimidating to someone already in distress. The security team adjusted their positions smoothly, maintaining their protective circle while allowing space for others to help collect the scattered groceries. The street continued its usual symphony: car horns, distant sirens, the rumble of the subway below. But the immediate area had grown quieter, as if the city itself was holding its breath to watch this moment unfold. The same crowd that had been so disconnected moments ago was now united in their attention to this simple act of kindness. People who had been hurrying past now slowed their pace, some stopping completely to watch. A few smiled, their faces softening as they witnessed something genuine in a city often accused of being impersonal. The sight of this tall, well-known young man moving so quickly to help a stranger seemed to touch something in everyone who saw it. The reaction was spreading through the crowd like ripples in a pond. Phones were recording, yes, but many people had lowered them, choosing instead to simply witness the moment. A small child tugged on his mother's sleeve, pointing and whispering questions. The mother knelt down, quietly explaining to her son about helping others, using the scene before them as a living lesson in compassion. As Barron reached the woman's side, his actions showed no hesitation, no concern for his image or status. The security team's earpieces crackled with updates, but their eyes remained alert, watching their charge demonstrate the kind of character that couldn't be taught by any amount of privileged education or social training. This moment, unfolding on an ordinary New York street corner, was about to demonstrate that sometimes the biggest impacts come from the smallest choices, like the choice to stop and help when others walk by. The next few seconds would show that true character isn't about who you are or where you come from, but about what you do when someone needs help. Kneeling beside the fallen woman, Barron's tall frame folded down with surprising grace. His first concern was making sure she wasn't hurt. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice gentle but clear above the city noise. The genuine worry in his tone made several onlookers pause in their tracks, phones half raised but forgotten as they watched the scene unfold. The woman looked up, slightly dazed, her silver hair slightly disheveled from the fall. Her eyes widened with recognition, but Barron's calm demeanor helped her focus on the moment rather than his famous last name. "I think so," she answered, her voice a bit shaky. "Just my pride that's hurt." She tried to smile, though her hands trembled as she attempted to gather her scattered belongings. "Let's make sure you're okay before you try to move," Barron said, putting a gentle hand on her shoulder to keep her from getting up too quickly. His security detail had created a protective circle around them, giving them space while keeping the growing crowd at a respectful distance. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk, creating a quiet bubble in the midst of the busy city. The woman introduced herself as Mrs. Chen, a longtime resident of the neighborhood. As she spoke, Barron noticed her wince slightly when she moved her arm. Without making a fuss, he caught the eye of his head of security and nodded slightly. The man immediately understood, speaking quietly into his earpiece to request medical assistance, just to be safe. While they waited, Barron began gathering Mrs. Chen's scattered groceries. His long arms made it easy to reach the items that had rolled further away. A few bystanders, inspired by his actions, stepped forward to help. An older gentleman in a business suit picked up some apples that had rolled near his feet. A young woman in exercise clothes retrieved the loaf of bread from near the newspaper stand. "My eggs," Mrs. Chen said suddenly, remembering the carton that had teetered on the curb. Barron reached over and carefully picked up the carton, checking inside. "Only 2 broken," he said with a reassuring smile. "That's not bad for New York sidewalk gymnastics." His gentle joke made Mrs. Chen laugh, helping to ease her embarrassment about the situation. The simple humanity of the moment touched everyone watching. Here was this tall, well-known young man, son of a former president, kneeling on a New York sidewalk, checking eggs and picking up groceries as if it were the most natural thing in the world. His height, which could have seemed intimidating, instead made him look like a gentle giant as he carefully helped gather the spilled items. Mrs. Chen told him about her weekly shopping routine as they waited for the medical help to arrive. She had lived in the neighborhood for 40 years, she explained, and knew every shop owner by name. Barron listened attentively, asking questions about her favorite stores and engaging in genuine conversation. His interest wasn't for show. You could see it in the way he tilted his head to hear her batter over the street noise. A street vendor who had watched the whole scene unfold offered Mrs. Chen a bottle of water. Another passerby brought over a small folding stool from a nearby shop, giving her a more comfortable place to sit. The initial crowd of curious onlookers had transformed into a small community of helpers, all inspired by one young man's quick response to someone in need. As they talked, Barron organized Mrs. Chen's groceries into stronger bags that someone had brought from a nearby store. He arranged everything carefully, making sure the eggs were on top and the heavy items were evenly distributed. These small, thoughtful actions spoke volumes about his character. It wasn't just about helping in the moment, but making sure Mrs. Chen would be able to get home safely with her shopping. The city continued its usual bustle around them, but something had changed in the atmosphere. The same corner that had been full of hurrying, disconnected people just minutes ago now felt like a small neighborhood gathering. Barron's simple act of stopping to help had created a ripple effect of kindness, reminding everyone who witnessed it that sometimes the most meaningful connections happen in the most unexpected moments. Through it all, Barron maintained a calm, reassuring presence. His security team, while always alert, seemed to share a quiet pride in watching their young charge handle the situation with such maturity and genuine care. This wasn't about photo opportunities or public image, it was simply about one person helping another, regardless of who they were or where they came from. The medical team arrived quickly, their approach professional but gentle. Most people would have considered their duty done at this point, but Barron showed no signs of leaving. Instead, he moved slightly to the side, giving the paramedics room to work while staying close enough to keep Mrs. Chen feeling comfortable and supported. The paramedics checked her vital signs and gently examined her for any injuries. During their examination, Barron engaged Mrs. Chen in conversation about her grandchildren, skillfully keeping her mind off any worry or embarrassment. His genuine interest showed in the way he leaned in slightly to hear her stories over the city noise, nodding and asking thoughtful questions about her family. "My grandson is tall like you," Mrs. Chen mentioned with a warm smile, her earlier nervousness completely gone. "He plays basketball for his school team." Barron's face lit up at this, and they launched into a friendly discussion about basketball, their shared enthusiasm creating a bubble of warmth on the busy street corner. The crowd had thinned somewhat, but those who remained were treated to a remarkable sight. A former president's son, who could have been anywhere else in the city, choosing to spend his afternoon ensuring the welfare of a stranger. His security detail had settled into a relaxed but vigilant formation, their eyes constantly scanning the area while their charge continued his act of kindness. A light breeze rustled through the trees lining the street, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and nearby food carts. The afternoon sun had softened, casting a golden glow over the scene. Nearby shop owners had come to their doorways, watching with approval as the young man demonstrated that wealth and status didn't preclude genuine human connection. When the paramedics confirmed that Mrs. Chen had no serious injuries, just some minor bruising, Barron's relief was visible. But he wasn't finished helping. Learning that she lived several blocks away, he immediately began making arrangements to ensure she got home safely with all her groceries. His security team exchanged knowing looks as their young charge pulled out his phone. With a few quick calls, he arranged for a car service to take Mrs. Chen home. The security team leader nodded approvingly. They had seen many sides of the young man they protected, but his instinct to help others never failed to impress them. While waiting for the car, Barron made sure Mrs. Chen had water to drink and a comfortable place to sit. He'd noticed earlier that one of her shopping bags had torn in the fall, so he asked a nearby store owner for a stronger bag. The shop owner, who had been watching the scene unfold, immediately brought out their best reusable shopping bag, refusing any payment. A young girl who had been watching with her mother approached shyly, offering Mrs. Chen a small bunch of flowers she'd bought from a street vendor. The simple gesture brought tears to Mrs. Chen's eyes, and Barron smiled warmly at the child, thanking her for her kindness. It was touching to see how one act of compassion could inspire others to show their own humanity. The conversation flowed naturally as they waited, with Mrs. Chen sharing stories about how the neighborhood had changed over the decades. Barron listened intently, showing genuine interest in her memories of a New York that existed before he was born. His questions were thoughtful and specific, showing that he wasn't just making polite conversation, but truly engaging with her experiences. When the car arrived, Barron personally helped arrange her shopping bags in the trunk, making sure nothing would spill or break during the ride home. He placed the eggs and delicate items on top, demonstrating a practical mindfulness that seemed beyond his years. The driver, recognizing his passenger, stood a little straighter, clearly impressed by the scene he had arrived to find. Before Mrs. Chen got into the car, she reached up, way up, to pat Barron's cheek in a grandmotherly gesture that made several onlookers smile. "You're a good boy," she said simply, her eyes twinkling. "Your mother raised you right." Barron's genuine smile and response showed that these simple words meant more to him than any formal recognition ever could. The whole incident had taken less than an hour, but in that time, this small section of New York City had been transformed from an impersonal street corner into a place where real human connection happened. As the car prepared to leave, the gathered crowd had witnessed something increasingly rare in our fast-paced world: the simple yet profound impact of one person choosing to stop and help another, regardless of who they were or where they came from. The videos and photos of Barron helping Mrs. Chen spread across social media like wildfire, but not in the usual sensation-seeking way. Instead, people shared the story with genuine warmth and appreciation. The images showed something rare in our digital age, an authentic moment of human kindness, unplanned and unscripted. One photo in particular caught the public's imagination: the tall young man kneeling on the sidewalk, carefully gathering scattered groceries, his face showing genuine concern rather than awareness of the cameras around him. The contrast between his height and his gentle actions touched something in people's hearts. As one comment put it, it's not about who he is, but what he chose to do. Local New Yorkers who witnessed the scene began sharing their own accounts. The hot dog vendor told customers how the young man had stayed until he was sure the woman was okay. A businessman who had stopped to watch wrote about how Barron's actions had made him miss his train, and how he didn't mind at all. These personal stories painted a picture that went beyond the usual celebrity news. The nearby coffee shop owner described how the crowd had changed from hurried strangers to a caring community in just minutes. People who wouldn't normally even look at each other were working together to help, she explained to her regular customers. It wasn't about getting attention or being filmed, it was about being human. Throughout the afternoon, people who had seen the incident firsthand shared their impressions with others. A teacher walking home from school told her husband about using it as an example for her students the next day. A business executive mentioned it during an afternoon meeting, making everyone pause and reflect on their own daily interactions. What struck most observers wasn't just the help itself, but the way it was given. There was no publicity team, no press release, no carefully crafted image to maintain. Just a young man who saw someone in need and responded with genuine care. The security team's presence only highlighted how unplanned the moment had been, their usual formation completely adapted to allow their charge to help someone in need. Parents walking by with their children stopped to watch, using the moment as a teaching opportunity. "See," one mother was heard telling her young son, "that's what it means to be a real gentleman." Another father pointed out to his daughter how helping others was more important than being on your phone. The incident sparked conversations all over the city. In office break rooms, at dinner tables, and on subway platforms, people discussed not just what had happened, but what it meant. Many admitted they usually walked past people needing help, always in a hurry, always with somewhere else to be. This story made them question those habits. Small acts of kindness began appearing around the same street corner. The next day, people held doors open a little longer. More smiles were exchanged between strangers. The coffee shop reported customers paying for others' drinks more often than usual. It was as if Barron's simple act had reminded everyone of their own capacity for kindness. Social media comments reflected this ripple effect. "Just helped an elderly man with his groceries," one person posted. "Remembered that story from yesterday and thought, why not?" Another wrote, "Saw someone drop their papers on the subway. Actually stopped to help instead of walking by. We all can do better." News outlets picked up the story, but what made it special was how it spread naturally through word of mouth. People weren't sharing it because it was trending. They shared it because it moved them. The lack of professional camera crews or polished press releases made it feel more genuine, more relatable. The city's heart, often hidden behind its tough exterior, showed through in how people responded to the story. It wasn't just about a famous person doing something nice. It was about being reminded that in a world that can feel increasingly disconnected, simple human kindness still has the power to touch hearts and change perspectives. By evening, the story had evolved beyond its original moment. It had become a reminder that every day presents opportunities to help others and that true character shows in the small moments when nobody expects you to step up. The public's reaction wasn't about celebrity or status. It was about recognizing and celebrating the basic goodness that connects all people. A week after the incident, Mrs. Chen sat in her favorite chair by the window of her apartment, surrounded by the soft afternoon light. She had just finished telling her story to a local newspaper reporter who had come to hear her perspective on what had happened that day. The reporter had expected a simple story about a chance encounter with a famous person. Instead, Mrs. Chen shared something much more meaningful. "You know what touched me the most?" she said, her eyes bright with emotion. "It wasn't just that he helped me up. It was how he listened, really listened, when I talked about my family. He wasn't checking his phone or looking around. He was just there, present in the moment, like helping me was the most important thing in his schedule." The reporter noticed how Mrs. Chen kept the reusable shopping bag she'd been given that day on a hook near her door. It had become a reminder of how unexpected kindness can appear in our lives. "Every time I go shopping now," she explained with a warm smile, "people at the grocery store ask about that day. But they don't ask about him being famous. They ask about how it felt to experience such genuine kindness from a stranger." Around the city, the story had taken on a life of its own, not as celebrity news, but as a reminder of our shared humanity. The corner where it happened had subtly changed. People walked a little slower there, looked up from their phones more often. The hot dog vendor noticed more people saying thank you and stopping for actual conversations instead of hurrying past. A teacher at a nearby school used the story in her class discussion about citizenship. She was surprised when her students focused not on Barron's famous name, but on his actions. "He could have just walked by like everyone else," one young student pointed out, "but he chose to stop." This simple observation led to a deep conversation about how small choices can make a big difference in someone's life. The security team, who had witnessed everything firsthand, noticed changes in how people reacted to their presence on daily walks. Instead of just staring or taking photos, people would sometimes share their own stories of helping others or being helped by strangers. It was as if the incident had opened up a channel for people to talk about the good they saw in their daily lives. Local business owners noticed a shift in the neighborhood's atmosphere. The coffee shop owner reported more customers chatting with strangers instead of rushing out with their drinks. The newsstand vendor smiled more often as people stopped to help when magazines blew over in the wind. Small acts of kindness that might have gone unnoticed before were now being recognized and appreciated. Mrs. Chen's grandchildren visited her the weekend after the incident, and she couldn't help but share every detail. Her grandson, the basketball player, was particularly moved. "You know, Grandma," he said, "it's not about being tall or famous or anything like that. It's about seeing someone who needs help and doing something about it." His words captured exactly what had made the moment so special. The story's impact continued to ripple outward in unexpected ways. A community group started a Kindness Corner initiative, encouraging people to share stories of everyday help they'd given or received. These weren't grand gestures or heroic acts, just simple moments of human connection that made city life a little warmer. 1 month after the incident, a survey of neighborhood residents revealed something surprising. People reported feeling more connected to their community, more likely to help strangers, and more optimistic about human nature in general. The simple act of one person helping another had somehow given everyone permission to be a little kinder, a little more present in each other's lives. Mrs. Chen still walked the same route to do her shopping, though now she often found herself stopping to chat with neighbors she'd never spoken to before. The incident had transformed her from a face in the crowd to a reminder that every person has a story worth hearing, worth stopping for. As autumn turned to winter, the story became part of the neighborhood's fabric. It wasn't told as a celebrity encounter anymore, but as a reminder that in a world that can feel increasingly disconnected, the simplest acts of kindness have the power to bring people together, to remind us of our shared humanity, and to show that sometimes the most meaningful moments in life are the ones where we simply stop to help someone in need.